370 billion rand cumulative shortfall. It's planning to push up the price of power by 15% from April. Now, while Eskom is perhaps the biggest state-owned entity problem, it's no secret a number of others are in dire straits. Rail agency Prasa, arms manufacturer Denel, in limbo, SAA, to name just a few. Many of them hollowed out by state capture, others hampered by inefficiency and poor management. Let's take this forward now with our Public Enterprises Minister, Pravin Gordhan. Minister, thank you so much for your time. So this week, when you replied in the SONA debate, you vowed to get money stolen from SoEs back. How much progress have you made so far?
Good afternoon, Sally, and good afternoon to your viewers. And thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to explain where we're going with SoEs. In respect of recovering money, you will see reports from each of the entities. For example, Eskom reported a few months ago, or a few weeks ago, that they've recovered 1.55 billion rands from a company called ABB, which had to concede that it had been part of what we would call a process of malfeasance within Eskom itself. It got repaid by McKinsey. It collected some money from Trillion, and it has a claim of 3.2 billion rands against directors and former executives of Eskom, which of course is a long civil process. Transnet has done similar work in relation to McKinsey, in relation to Trillion and the famous 1064 locomotive acquisition. And the numbers are still flying around, but that's another 5, 10, 15 billion rands that was paid in one way or another, either to the OEM, original equipment manufacturer, or to intermediaries as well. So the first level of recovery is that which can be recovered from within South Africa, and where companies and entities are willing to negotiate with each of the SOEs, those negotiations will continue. Where litigation is required, litigation will be entered into. Where the SIU has undertaken investigations, its tribunal will be approached to give us or instruct the SIU to collect whatever it can from a particular entities. But the real big pot, so to speak, is the money that was filtered out of the country with the help of lawyers, with the help of accountants, with the help of financial institutions, and probably other entities as well. And there are examples around the world where such recoveries of funds have been undertaken, where the location of the funds have been identified, and each of the entities will look at the possibilities available to them as an additional front, because often we think that some people have left the country or they're based in another country and therefore they're unreachable. The public might be aware, for example, of the Nigerian government, which recovered a couple of $2 billion from a former president who had acquired that money and had it located either in one of the financial centers or one of the tax havens. So there are examples and precedents around the world, and we intend to pursue those using both the South African channel, so to speak, and other channels that will be available to us.
You know, that is encouraging to hear, because I think so many South Africans are so angry about what has been stolen from us. They want to see some sort of action. That is encouraging. What's not so encouraging for the average consumer is the fact that we're going to have to pay more for the price of power. Eskom telling us this week it's going to go up by 15% from April. And here's the thing. This is how consumers feel. Why should consumers pay the price of years of corruption and inefficiency at Eskom? Inefficiency, corruption that should have been apprehended by the government, by ministers, by portfolio committees that we are hearing at the State Capture Commission didn't do what they were supposed to do. We're not seeing heads roll at the very least. The consumer's angry about that. What do you say to them?
No, you are entirely justified, but being angry is one thing. Converting that anger into purposeful action is another. And I think what we want here is support for all of those agencies, whether they be boards of SOEs, executives within the current SOEs, or the current executives within the SOEs, law enforcement agencies, and others who are attempting to do the right thing. So that's the first point.
Sure.
The second point is that there's no hiding the fact that whether it is ministers or directors general or members of those boards of SOEs or management within those SOEs, all of them to one extent or another facilitated that stealing. And we must not accept the narratives that they put out and the whataboutisms that they float
Sure.
around in order to cover their tracks. So, but we do live in the age of misinformation and fake news, where just tweeting one thing can
Sure.
set off a string of
But I mean, so let's
lies,
look
if
at,
you
absolutely, I agree with you, and I think it's a massive problem. But let's look at who was in charge. Malusi Gigaba, Lynn Brown were Public Enterprises Minister, I think probably over the worst of what we now believe was the worst of the looting. And I'm thinking of the Optimum coal contract, the Guptas,
Yes.
that sort of thing. Okay, they're not in Parliament anymore, but they're not behind bars either. Do you think we'll ever see that sort of accountability? And the reason I ask this is from an ANC perspective as well. There's so much pushback within the party that it seems the party cannot even follow through when Ace Magashule, who is actually in court again tomorrow, standing for charges of corruption, he's not stepping down, even though it's actually fairly clear to anyone who reads it that corruption-accused people in the party need to step aside. With that kind of deadlock within the ANC, how can you make any progress in getting to the people in Parliament in power at the time during state capture? It seems an impossible task. Is that why our president is not able to act?
Well, as far as the ANC is concerned, I think there are very clear resolutions, both at the 54th conference on the question of state capture and corruption. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that even at an NEC level, we've had the issue of corruption raised, and there's a very clear intent stated, I think, in the statement that was issued, to say that under certain conditions, the reports of the Integrity Commission must be evaluated, and at the next NEC meeting, at least within a month, must be enacted in some way or the other. So, and the third thing is that I think there will of course be pushback. It's not only within the ANC, it's in other quarters as well. And I'm afraid in the media as well, certain sections, where this negative, if you like, narrative to cover corruption.
Sure, I understand the pushback, but it's the lack of action. It's the lack of action that is the problem that I'm asking.
Well, this is where we can only do that which is within our capability. For the rest, we rely upon the law enforcement agencies, and those cases are reported, those cases are investigated, and the prosecuting authority must do its bit as well.
Sure.
So
when it comes to Ace Magashule, for example, he's, a lot has been said about doing the ethically right thing and stepping down. Do you think he should?
Of course he should, in accordance with the 54th conference resolutions. And I think that on the one hand, you can appeal to an individual's conscience, wherever it might be, to do the right thing. On the other hand, resolutions of the organization need to be implemented in some way as well. So that's absolutely clear. And let's see what happens in the next few weeks.
I have to ask you, in 2015 you were finance minister, if my memory serves me correct. I know that it was just for a brief period.
For a short period.
Yes. But when you look back at that period, do you wish you'd done more? Do you think you should have spoken out more about state capture, about what was going on? Do you go, I should have done this, I could have done this?
Not really, because 2015 was still a very foggy period, if you like. It's only in 2017, when the so-called Gupta leaks took place, that all of the dots could be connected, all of the role players could be identified, and the emails are very clear about who did what, where, who undertook a trip to Switzerland or to Dubai and in order to do what. And I think those facts stand for themselves on the one hand, but on the other hand, help us to paint a story of how malfeasance took place, firstly. Secondly, during the whole of 2016, when it wasn't 2015 actually, Sally, it was December 2015 going into 2016, I was together with others, including the Deputy Minister, Tabisi Jonas, in fact, the subject of relentless attacks at the time. We have short memories about this because the target was the capture of the Treasury. The Director General of the Treasury, the former one, has appeared before the Zondo Commission and stated very clearly how and what happened during his tenure in relation to state capture and various projects that were intended to advance malfeasance. We spoke out during 2016, and indeed all sections of society spoke out as well. And it was a heightened period of awareness in our country about the role that corruption actually played.
As you're touching on the Zondo Commission and mindful of the clock that is ticking and my producer that's getting edgy about time, the State of the Nation address, the President endorsed the work of the State Capture Commission, important to do because of all the criticisms we've seen from the former President. You appeared in November last year. You were subjected to quite a grilling by Dali Mpofu during cross-examination on behalf of former SARS boss Tom Moyane. It wasn't an entirely pleasant experience, I'm sure. So as someone who's had that difficult experience at the State Capture Commission, do you still endorse everything that the Commission is doing?
Absolutely, in an unqualified way.
That's good to hear. I want to quickly go back to policy and plans for Eskom because we need to see a way out of what we're going to do with our SOEs. I know that that there's a broader SOE plan, overarching legislation for state-owned companies, a centralized SOE model, a presidential state-owned enterprises council, which all sounds great. But if you can have the best plans and people in the world, but if some of these SOEs are past their sell-by date, shouldn't they just be closed down?
Of course. And that's part of the evaluation that the council set up by the President will go into, because it has both private sector people and government people as well. So there's absolutely no doubt that we need to revisit the mandates of each of the SOEs. Some of the departments are already progressing well in small business, in communications, in minerals and energy as well, amongst other departments, where there are possibilities of consolidating agencies or rationalizing them in some way. We need to give momentum to that. And secondly, as I said, to review the mandates and see whether they're still relevant. So, and thirdly, if you look at what the President had to say today, vaccines and the production of vaccines and the sovereign capability, both for ourselves as a country and for the continent as well, becomes an important new venture. There is an entity, BioVac, which Minister Nzimande accounts for as a government representative, and BioVac's capacity needs to be increased, or other entities need to be set up. There's 4IR as a new phenomenon in our society, which we need in order to very quickly advance our youth into the world of...
I agree. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Is SAA worth saving?
Yes, it is. It is because, firstly, people at SAA, if SAA was liquidated, would go home with either nothing or a maximum of 32,000, and after 20 or 30 years service, imagine you were a cabin crew member.
No, I understand that. But what about, if it's not working, can you use that argument? Because isn't it going to be ultimately more problematic?
What we have committed to, Sally, and that's the unfortunate part of some of the narrative that comes from the naysayers, is that we understand that as a state we cannot continue with bailouts, and I said so in the speech that I made. Secondly, we intend to get a substantial strategic equity partner. Thirdly, it is with that equity partner and really truly experienced management team that this airline must go forward. So we have no pretensions that the state can run an airline. In fact, I've learnt a lot about the aviation industry in the last few days as well. And it's a very small group of people in South Africa that have these skills, and there are very few black people who have these skills. So part of our task is to ensure that we develop that capacity within our country amongst the majority population.
I think that's so important. Do you have an equity partner as yet? We've been hearing about it for quite a few months.
We've had to go through various phases. So we had a transaction advisor. We had over 30 interested parties that made one offer or another. Each of them have been evaluated by a transaction advisor. The field has been narrowed down. We have an interim board now that is undertaking that evaluation this very week. We hope that process is concluded by late this week, that's tomorrow, or Monday or Tuesday at the latest. And then government must move forward on that particular question, and we will.
That's very encouraging news. I have to ask you one last question because it's all about load shedding.
You're welcome.
And the President said in his State of the Nation address, he spoke a lot about opening up for independent power supplies, and that's welcome because it means we can get more power onto the grid. But he still said we're going to probably have 5 more years of load shedding. And every energy analyst I speak to welcomes the move to open up to independent private producers and get alternative energy on board. But they say it's still not happening quickly enough. Can it go quicker? Can you make it go quicker? Do you want to make it go quicker?
Yes, we do. Because I think that our country and our people, as the President emphasized today, have a huge amount of potential that is unrealized, both in the economy, in terms of our human capabilities, and what the President referred to as our endowments as a country. And secondly, energy is a crucial part. Thirdly, our commitments in respect of climate change need to be met. And fourthly, we need what we call a just transition. And a just transition means workers in the mines, workers at power stations, communities around power stations must be properly consulted, included, and be the beneficiaries of the processes that will actually unfold. So we are totally impatient with the need to get more generation capacity. I think the Eskom CEO and board have said so as well. And my colleague, Minister Mantashe, and I will do everything possible on the instructions of the President and what the country requires to ensure that that generation capacity is actually added. And as far as Eskom is concerned, its biggest burden is a decision that none of us were involved in. A decision made many years ago to say we will foot the bill from the tariffs for the building of Medupi and Kusile, including all of the misdesigning and the corruption that went on during that particular period as well. And I'm afraid that's where the 450 billion rand burden comes. And that too, we've set a target that within the next few months, on the basis of all the evidence that we have, we need to come up with a formula as we restructure Eskom into its 3 components of generation, transmission, and distribution. So there is hope at the end of the tunnel. We're going to go through a slight rough patch, but I think we can put together an action plan and actually do things to prove to the public that we're serious about having a lot more stable energy and secure energy supply that will reassure business on the one hand and the millions of consumers that Eskom supplies as well.
Well, good luck to you, sir, and thank you very much for your time this evening. I do appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan.